Hi guys, Jay Martin here, CEO of Cambridge House, and this next conversation is with Angela Benton, the founder of Streamlytics, an ethical data collection company. And we're gonna get into what exactly that means. But Angela is an amazing entrepreneur, the winner of many awards and accolades, including Goldman Sachs 100 Most Intriguing Entrepreneurs and Fast Companies, Most Influential Women in Technology, among many others. So today, what I wanted to talk to Angela about, because she is an absolute beast and voice of authority when it comes to data privacy and data exploitation, is the future of data exploitation. This could go dystopian or utopian very easily. And so we got into all the nuances of the present state of data exploitation, how our data is brokered, bought and sold and leveraged, the utility of data, how you value personal data, what the future of data rights could be. And it was fascinating because she really opened up the kimono on what happens behind the scenes. And we've had a handful of discussions on this channel with amazing individuals like Christopher Wiley from Cambridge Analytica, who kind of let us in the door and in the room to what occurred right preceding the 2016 US election and how Cambridge Analytica manipulated a ton of data to facilitate some very interesting conversations. So Angela was fascinating to talk to, and I learned a ton. I have some action steps I'm taking as a consequence of this interview. So it's very consequential in that regard, and I really hope you enjoy it. So if you do, drop me a comment, let me know what you think. As always, the top comment is a pinned link to my personal newsletter. I'd love to have you join as a subscriber. I publish weekly, it's free. I talk about my biggest takeaways from conversations just like this. I talk about companies I've invested in and industries and verticals that I'm curious about. As always, if you dig the YouTube content, please click subscribe and turn on notifications wherever that is. And I appreciate it. So Angela Benson, founder of Streamlytics. I hope you enjoy.
What I love to do is introduce the right people to the right people, assemble the smartest people I can think of or reach out to carry that conversation, and that's exactly what I've done today.
Please give my panel a round of applause. Welcome.
Okay guys, Jay Martin here, CEO of Cambridge House, and I'm joined right now by Angela Benson, the founder of Streamlytics. Angela, how are you?
I am fantastic. How are you?
I'm really good, and I'm very happy you're able to make the time to come on and get in front of my audience. So you're, one of the global voices of authority when it comes to data privacy, data exploitation, but more importantly, I guess how things could change for the better in the future. And you're one of the entrepreneurs trying to provide those solutions. So what I would love to do today is dive into the present state of data privacy, dive into maybe why we should be concerned, where could things go, where they're at, where they could go. Let's talk about the potential solutions and the best case scenarios that maybe if we work together towards, we can get there. And then some of the nuances involved in all of this. Because, it's something that I'm surprised I'm not more concerned about, truthfully. I think I'm quite aware of how I am being exploited and harvested, but I don't lose sleep over this, which is crazy when you consider what's occurring, So maybe to begin, let's just frame this a little bit and talk to me about the present state of not necessarily data privacy, but the present state of data exploitation.
Sure. This is a great question. And actually something that you said was really interesting. And it was that you're surprised about how you're not as concerned, I guess, as you feel like you should be. And most people are like that, particularly like millennials and the younger generation, primarily because we grew up with the internet, right? And so our federal data privacy, laws, which are non-existent, like what companies are doing, big internet companies, the privacy guidelines have not changed since the internet started, which means, all of these companies were trying to figure out business models and trying to figure out how to make money. And the idea and thesis around these businesses were that, hey, I'm going to provide you this service, said internet platform or app or whatever for free, or I guess for free, but it's really an exchange, for your data and your personal information that is then on the site. And then when you take a look at the explosion of these little computers that are in our purses and in our wallets, in our pockets every day. I mean, that in and of itself is kind of a data transmission device, right? It contains, a ton of personal information. It contains location information. A lot of times people don't even realize that it gets as specific as like the longitude and latitude, of where you're actually going. I looked at my personal data, and it also, if anyone hasn't done a data request, especially from any of the large technology companies, Google or an Apple or an Amazon, I definitely recommend that you do it and just open the data files, take a look at what is actually in there. And I think that activity in and of itself is like kind of a rude awakening and kind of is very sobering and really helps people understand, like, wow, they really have a lot of data on me. And that is honestly what's getting bought and sold. And so I think Facebook is probably the best example and the most used example that people use, because people pretty much know, okay, I'm going on Facebook, I'm getting served ads because now I'm in their ecosystem. Mm-hmm. But what a lot of people don't realize is it's not just Facebook. It's a lot of other companies that are then tracking you across wherever you go on the internet. And a lot of times, if you've ever had a conversation with someone and, maybe the conversation was about dog food and then you start getting served dog food ads, and it's like, is my phone listening to me? And, the official responses that a lot of these companies give are no, we're not listening to you, but our algorithms are so accurate that they're predictive. You know what I mean? Which they're probably listening to us. You know what I mean? And so, when, things like that start to happen, it's very invasive. And I think we're in a interesting point in time where people want their privacy back. You know what I mean? Technology, the growth of technology, the kind of infiltration into our everyday life is not going to change, but we should still be able to have some type of agency over, our privacy, over our data, and how it's used. And so, very long-winded, but long story short, these are very real life examples of the state of data today and how it's being used. There's, an industry that is, $1 trillion industry called the data brokerage market, where it's largely opaque, meaning a lot of people don't really know that it exists. And the whole market is around buying and selling data. And so consumers have no idea this is happening. They don't get to participate in kind of these data transactions that are happening, but billions of dollars are being made from companies doing this, and trillions, of data points are exchanged between companies and organizations.
Yeah, and that's occurred to me for sure. And I can't recall a specific product, but I've absolutely had a conversation with my wife and then been targeted with an ad for the specific shoe. I think I was looking at like a pair of Adidas or talking about a pair of Adidas, something silly like that. And I'd never done a search, but obviously, and when you sign up for these platforms, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, whatever, you go through the permissions. Do you allow access to your camera and microphone? So yeah, of course I've allowed access to my microphone. Why wouldn't they use that access? I've also, I think it was after the Cambridge Analytica leak, like when this whole thing blew up after the 2016 election, and certain social media platforms started to, I guess, maybe be a bit more forward with their practices, whether forced or trying to be proactive, I'm not sure which, but I suddenly started getting emails from Google, and they would just give me, for some reason, reports on my location for the previous month. Right. And it would show where I'd been and all this stuff. And then like a photo history. Right. And it was eerie at the time that some anonymous email was suddenly emailing me pictures of my 3-year-old son. And I was like, what? It's creepy. But I also got over it surprisingly fast. Now I'm going to dive into the data request because that's really interesting. So before I jump into the brokerage market and a couple things there, how do you request how do you put in a data request? What is that and how would I do it?
Yeah. So last year, California specifically came out with this law called CCPA. This is important because California is kind of like an economy in and of itself. It's, the fifth largest economy in the world. And a lot of times policy that's being passed in California other states will basically follow suit. And so this was a big deal from a data privacy perspective. But when that changed, a lot of companies ended up changing their data. Well, actually, I'm not even going to say ended up changing, because I feel like it was non-existent. There was no way to actually get your data. There was like no way to email someone. Even if you looked at the privacy policy, there was like a legal email, but it wasn't anything that was a specific request for your data. And so when CCPA passed, that basically said, okay, anybody that does business or has a customer in the state of California has to comply with this, which was a huge deal. And so a lot of companies basically ended up launching these data request portals that allow consumers to go in and basically do a data request. And so it's different, for every company, but usually it's pretty easy to get to if you just type in, Google data request or Amazon data request or Netflix data request. And so there's no kind of standard way of going in to grab your data. But like once you actually get to your portal, you will 1000% have to be logged in to get access to it. Some are easier than others. Hulu's a nightmare to actually get your data, just in terms of the process is not efficient at all, meaning you have to verify like your email like 3 different times to actually get your data. And then when your data is in this portal that they have, they give you a PDF. So you can't really do anything with it. Most companies will give you access to like a CSV or a JSON file or even like an HTML file. So for instance, your YouTube data is usually like in a HTML file.
Okay.
So once you have your data, if it's a multi-service platform, so like a Google or an Amazon or an Apple, where they have so many products and services, they have a ton of different data on you. What you're going to end up getting is not one data file. It's going to be an archive. So like a zip file, and there's going to be hundreds of folders and hundreds of files of all of your data in there. And so for the everyday person, there's nothing that they can really do with this data file outside of just have it and feel better about actually having it. But it's very difficult to do anything around, let's say you wanted to monetize your personal data. You can't really do anything individually with it, just because it's not useful at an individual level. But even more than that, the format is an issue. So, not only do we not have a federal data privacy law in the United States, we're the largest Western country that does not have one. There's also no data standard. So many of the companies, when CCPA went into effect, many of the companies were like, nobody wants to be in Facebook's position now, right? Where Facebook is the bad guy. And everyone hates Facebook because of what they do to data with your data. Nobody wants to be in that position. So people are like, oh, well, here's all your data, but it's not in a usable format. So there's not a data standard where, there's kind of one unified file where your data truly is portable from platform to platform.
Got it. Okay. I'm going to do this. I'm looking forward to this. Pulling, I guess, my data request from.
You'll learn a lot. Particularly like your Google data. When I looked at my Google data, it's my location data. It also gives you some insight around, the algorithms that they use. So for instance, my location data had my longitude and latitude, but then you could also see some of what the algorithm was trying to predict. So it would say that I was in a bus or on foot or in a 2-wheel vehicle or on a bike, or that I'm tilting. And so it gets eerily specific.
Yeah. Okay. I think I need that. I need to see that from. So Here's a question for you. I think, we are aware at this point that we're being leveraged for marketing purposes, right? Mm-hmm. But are there some more nefarious activities that we should be concerned about? Is there anything darker, Angela, that, marketing is marketing, and we can not like that. Personally, I don't like it, but I still succumb to it. I still use the platforms, right? Mm-hmm. Is there anything more off the radar, more nefarious that we're less aware of and should be concerned about?
Yeah, I think when people think about data exploitation, they tend to think about it from ads and marketing. But you brought up Cambridge Analytica before. That is an amazing use case of how data can be exploited to change the physical world we live in terms of how our governments are ran, who gets elected. So Cambridge Analytica was kind of, I think, the biggest example because it included kind of what was happening with the United States election. But there are elections that are happening around the world in smaller countries and Caribbean countries where people are using data. They're using Facebook's platform to basically, seed anti-racist, seed, alt-right or even alt-left, behavior, and really change the dynamics of political races. So it's very scary when you think about it from that perspective. And also it's very scary when you think about it from the perspective of how much time we all spend connected to something that is generating data. So it's less about, I'm hanging out on social media. I don't care if you're not on social media. Your phone, your device are still generating data. That data is still being used and can be exploited for things like, who's going to be the lawmaker, in your country.
Yeah, truly. And it's okay. I'm glad that you brought that up. I did have the opportunity to speak with Christopher Wiley, one of the individuals involved with the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And the way he walked me through what occurred was so sophisticated in their ability to exploit these vulnerabilities in individuals that create essentially artificial support groups and communities for very radical ideas that then somebody who might be a bit leaning that way would find a community where they could be comfortable saying some very radical things and encourage some horrible ideas. So,
well, not only that, and not to interrupt you, but even, this has happened, in my own family, and I've talked with several people, the aging generation who are on YouTube and might not really understand how the algorithms are working that are serving you content. If you watch one thing on Trump because he said something outrageous and you search for it on YouTube and now you're watching a Trump video, now you're kind of in Trump land in terms of the content that's getting served to you. And it literally leads to brainwashing.
Right. Yeah. Well, it does because it's your newsfeed, right? Yeah. It's your newsfeed, whether it's as simple as your Instagram or your Facebook or your Twitter. But you're fed complimentary pieces of content, no matter which rabbit hole you go down, like pick one.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Okay. So here's a question for you. We have access to these social platforms for free because our data is the product that is bought and sold. So, we are the product in that sense. What is more likely in the future? That platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and whatnot put up paywalls and say, we won't leverage your platform, but now you have to pay us. Is that more likely? Or is it more likely that Instagram comes to me and says, we still want to harvest your data and we'll pay you for it. So instead of me paying them, they're now giving me a cut of my own data in the future. Is either one of those more likely to you? I
personally think the latter is more likely. I don't, and I know, Facebook put up when Apple released their latest update 14.5, where they're not allowing third-party developers to kind of track you. That significantly impacted, Facebook's business. And so they kind of put up these interstitials that are like, help keep Facebook free, which is, really weird and kind of alluded to, oh my God, is Facebook going to start charging? Or is Instagram going to start charging? I personally don't think that that's likely at all, because their whole model is based on growth. It's based on the volume of people, the volume of activity that happens on the platform. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think what's more likely is they're going to keep focusing on growth and like volume. But what might happen is there may be some type of license where an individual may license their data to them and get a percentage of how much money is being made off of it.
Okay. So I know there's been some changes in the right direction. You mentioned one of them with Apple. What else has changed recently in the data exploitation business for the better?
Honestly, I think Apple is brilliant in the sense of they took a proactive approach to data privacy. And so they didn't wait around for people to lump them into this big tech category who exploits data. They took a proactive approach and said, privacy is important to us. These are the things that we're doing. These are the changes that, we're making to our platform. That is absolutely significant just by pure definition of like how many people have iOS devices. Now, what would be interesting is if Google made a similar play. But a lot of Google's businesses are ad-based businesses. But still, I mean, at the end of the day, even though Apple has this big footprint in terms of, the number of devices that they have, globally, Android still is the leader in terms of devices. So we'll see, kind of what happens with Google. But I feel like what just happened with Apple and their operating system update with 14.5 is probably the most significant thing that's happened as of late.
Can you simplify that for me? What was the big change with 14.5?
So the big change was, so for application developers who are in the App Store, sometimes you'll get ads or apps may or may not ask you for access to information that's on your phone. A lot of times they don't. And really when you're downloading it, the assumption is that, okay, well, they're downloading this app and creating an account. And so they're opting in to give me access to all of this stuff on their phone. So your location, any personal information, what have you. What Apple has done is, number one, they have made it very difficult for these third parties, so application developers, to track you across multiple apps. So for me, Angela, if I was an application developer, I obviously want access to information that's happening on my app. But what was happening before is I could say, okay, well, my app is installed on Jay's phone. So I also, since my app is installed on Jay's phone, I also want to know what Jay is doing in Joe Schmo's app and in Sally's app. And so they have completely stopped that. And then they've also put up kind of barriers so that consumers know, hey, this app is requesting this location. They want to use this information. They want to use your location. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Is it okay for them to always use, your location, or only when you're using the app? And so they're kind of forcing, the user and consumers to really understand what's happening with their data on a day-to-day basis. It's not just signing up for an app that's a cool app. Like now you kind of are forced to understand, okay, I'm signing up for this cool app, but they want access to this information and they want to track my location, even when I'm not using the app. Okay.
So it's a transparency practice, right? I'm acknowledging and accepting or not. Okay.
Exactly.
Now, is this enough, Angela? Like, say Google adopts a similar practice, so does Facebook. I don't know how likely that is. You tell me. Is that enough for us to feel protected, less exploited, less exposed, or is there still a long way to run? What were your thoughts?
I mean, that's a good question. It really depends on how far in the future you want to think about it. You know what I mean? If we're talking about, the next couple of years, I feel like, there's a solution that's probably less technical heavy, right? And then far off in the future, it might be that everyone has personal servers, and your personal server essentially is a pod that you're allowing people to request access to not even your full kind of data set, but your individual pieces of data that live within your full data set. I'm a big sci-fi fan. And so I don't know if any of your audience watches Westworld, but the last season of Westworld was fantastic in the sense that what they were really talking about was the transfer of data and kind of this external consciousness that could be transferred from different cyborgs was essentially this you in the form of data. You know what I mean? So it really just depends about how far in the future you want to kind of think about it. But I don't think that it's unrealistic to think that, everything that we're doing on a daily basis is not producing kind of this digital version of ourselves that can be transferred back and forth in the future between entities, between people, between hosts, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. You put it in a good way, right? Depends on how far into the future you want to think about it. Because one sector that I feel like we're just getting started is the integration of our health and our data, I guess, right? And we all now, a lot of us have some kind of wearable, whether it's an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or a Whoop Band, an Oura Ring, whatever. But this is only going to become more common to like smart patches that are able to, in real time, tell your phone what your blood glucose levels are. That's
what I'm talking about. Like, this is a huge thing. So people right now are like, oh, ads. And it's like, that's how it starts, right? Yeah. And that's, I think, what is scary that people don't really understand. Like, okay, it's starting with ads. You think it's not important. You think it can't really affect your life, but then flash forward 5 years, and then all of a sudden people have ownership over your genetic data. If you've ever taken a test on 23andMe, which I have, there's actually a great story about this. 23andMe is actually partnering with a pharmaceutical company to do drug development, but using genetic data. And so where are they getting the data from? So they have this whole licensing agreement where people who just want to know what their ethnicity is or, whatever genetic markers they have, they're using that data to actually work with Big Pharma in a monetary transaction that no one else gets a piece of, which is incredible. That's happening.
That's terrifying. And, it's funny. I've been looking for a business opportunity from an investor standpoint. I geek out on all the biohacking stuff. What's lacking in my life is bio-tracking, right? One central platform that consolidates, my blood work from my eHealth and Life Labs, my genetic data from 23andMe, my activity data from my Whoop Band and my Oura Ring, and all this stuff. I'd love one platform that opens me up to all kinds of risk, I suppose, and what we got to solve that problem before we get there. Side note: if anybody's working on that business, call me. I'd love to talk to you. But okay, so and I haven't seen I've only seen the first season of Westworld. It was fantastic, but
the first season to me was a little slow, to be honest.
All right.
I had to keep watching it, and a dear friend of mine forced me. They were like, no, it's about data. It's everything that you talk about. Just keep watching it. And so the latest season is fantastic. But yes, keep watching it. All
right. It's tough if I don't have buy-in from my wife, and she didn't love the first season. If we don't, I'm not going to watch it by myself. I just don't do that. But yeah, I'll work on that. Okay. So let's get into the value of data. Well, first of all, talking about Streamlytics. We haven't talked about Streamlytics yet. Your business, right? And what you're doing to provide solutions for both consumers and enterprises. So what is ethical data collection? And what do you do?
So Streamlytics is, this company that I started a few years ago around I guess, my passion for data. I was actually working on kind of a creative project, and I was looking for data or for content production. And it literally, I wasn't able to find any, which seemed really weird. I was really looking very specifically for streaming data, what people were watching, so that I would know what content to produce. And I wasn't able to find any, and I just kind of fell down this whole rabbit hole of, data privacy. And at the time, GDPR, was happening. And it just seemed like, from an investor standpoint, I have a background in early stage investing. So from an investment standpoint, you kind of are trained to look at trends and like how they're going to go into other markets. I felt like it was a huge market, particularly, in the US. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized that there needed to be like a real solution for consumers. And so what we're actually doing at Streamlytics is we actually help people monetize their personal data. But one of the things that is kind of core to what we're doing is kind of what you explained a little bit earlier, which is we actually created a data standard. It's called the Universal Data Interchange Format, and we filed a patent for it. It applies to data that's transferred just in technology ecosystems right now, but then also specifically for blockchain, for biometric data, and even for autonomous vehicle data. And so, when you think about kind of where the world goes and all of this data that we're going to be producing on a regular basis, there really does need to be a kind of unified data standard that allows people, entities, and organizations to transfer bits of data back and forth without the way that it's happening right now, which is you go and do a data request and get back thousands of files. And so once we actually process data, it actually gets valued. We created a proprietary algorithm that actually values data. And so this is important. And by the way, I'm saying we're doing all of these things. We had to solve all these solutions to even do the original business idea, because this market is so new and no one is really operating for, I guess I would say, efficiency or even from an ethical standpoint. And so there are other companies that allow you to sell your data. But what's interesting is they'll say, oh, your data is not worth a lot. It's $1 or $2. And so no one's really going to take the time to monetize their personal data for $1 or $2. That's not significant. We took a different approach in terms of how we value data, because we're saying, well, look, we don't believe your data is worth $1 or $2 because said company is worth $1 trillion or close to it, right? And their business is built off data. So just on that thesis alone, we know your data is worth more than $1 or $2. And so what we actually end up doing in our algorithm is we look at kind of the data set that is uploaded to the system, but then we also look at things like, okay, where's the data from? What's the data source? Is this a publicly traded company? What's the market cap of that company? You know what I mean? And so we have a formula where we back into what we call a data point valuation. And so the data point valuation then allows us to, I guess, kind of at a unit economic level, value a data file in and of itself. So that's kind of what we do there. And so we had to solve the problem of number one, how much your data is worth. And then we had to solve the problem of two, there's no unified standard for data. And so when we solve those two problems, basically what that allows us to then do is have a pool of data that, number one, is ethically sourced. We say ethically sourced because when we're talking about data partners, we're talking about consumers. Consumers are our data partners. When they decide, hey, I want to monetize my data, I'm going to upload it, we issue a data license that says you own your data, not us. This is how much we're going to buy it from you at based on this valuation, which obviously we come up with from our algorithm. We unify it into our data standard, the UDIF data standard, and then it gets cleaned and enhanced. We have other libraries of metadata that make it a little bit more valuable. And then we're able to sell data streams to enterprises who are very motivated to use first-party data, but more so use first-party data that is ethically sourced.
Okay, this is fascinating. So, yeah, it makes so much sense. I mean, if somebody were to ask me, or even have a conversation about what's my data worth, like exactly, I wouldn't have a clue where to start with that, right? How would I have any idea? And so, you're kind of working backwards, looking at the consumer of said data, determining the utility of it within their organization, the valuation of their enterprise as a consequence, and then working backwards to determine what the value could be. But we're really starting from nothing, right? And so that's why when you get into the unified data standard, it makes sense, because if I do my data requests from Google, the one from Facebook, one from Netflix, it's not like apples to apples, I guess, right? I get this from over here and that over there.
Well, exactly. It's not apples to apples. So you literally get JSON files, HTML, CSV, XML, and even the way that it's structured. So a good example might be your data from Google. They may have kind of a folder within the archive titled YouTube, and then some nested folders in there with what you think is all of your YouTube data. But then there's another folder outside of the YouTube folder that says activity. And within that folder is more YouTube data. So it's very messy. It's not really usable at all. And then, one might think this is intentional from big tech companies. One might think.
Yeah, no, I completely would agree that it probably is, right? Yeah. If your business is reliant on a practice that is more frequently under scrutiny, it's in your best interest to make that as confusing as possible, right? And just delay any attack, right? You're going to get lost in the labyrinth. So good luck trying to find out what we're up to, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly why, our data monetization apps, we're not in app stores. And we're not in app stores intentionally, because what happened with Facebook being in Apple's app store and Apple saying, hey, you can't do what you've been doing, has completely disrupted, their business and their business model. And rightfully so, that's Apple's ecosystem. It's Google's ecosystem, to be able to do that. But a lot of times when you're trying to disrupt models, which that's really what we're doing at Streamlytics, it's a new way of doing things that really is shifting the power back to the consumer. It's a risk to be in an app store.
Interesting. Okay. So then is the ambition, Angela, to essentially commoditize data? So we know, we talk about the unified data standard and data point valuation. We want to have standard evaluation, I guess, right, to commoditize this stuff. And so we just know based on how deep I'm willing to forfeit my data, I'm worth said dollars, or how do you think that?
Yeah, the ambition for us is not to commoditize it. The thesis is that your data is already commoditized, actually. Okay. What we feel like we're doing is we're leveling the playing field. Like your data, trust and believe, is already being bought and sold. What we're saying is, okay, well, that's already happening. And by the way, it's just going to continue to happen more, especially when you start to think about and understand artificial intelligence and how that is going to be powering everything. A lot of people don't realize and understand, the algorithms kind of within AI, they learn from data. Like that's how they get smart. You have to feed it data in order for it to be a smart algorithm and make good decisions. And so, when you think about it from that perspective, there are training data sets that people need to leverage in order for that ecosystem to be accurate and to be fair. And so for us, what's important is that we're leveling the playing field. Like, again, it's not just about what ads you're getting sold. That's kind of the tip of the iceberg, really, is that, yes, you're getting served ads. Yes, it's data-driven marketing or whatever. But number one, you should get a piece of that. Number two, as the world continues to progress, there are other implications in society and our everyday lives. When you think about, okay, well, a lot of credit decisions are made off of algorithms. You know what I mean? So we need to make sure that the algorithms are really being fed, data that's representative of the world that we live in. And so this can be a huge issue, particularly when you start to think about, people of color, people who have been, historically, kind of disadvantaged. And now you add an algorithm that was developed by some white guy in Silicon Valley who's not thinking about, oh, my training data set needs to be reflective of, the world we live in today, because it could be the make or break decision between someone getting a house or someone getting a car. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So how do we solve that?
That's a part of what we're doing at Streamlytics. And so, our go-to-market strategy was we said that we want to focus on fast-growing communities that are diverse. So like our data acquisition application that's in market now is actually focused on the African-American community. We have over 125 million data points. So we're the largest first-party data provider of African-American data. And so what that means is, number one, again, back to the consumer, we are now transferring some of that power back into consumers' hands monetarily and directly back into their households. I mean, people are getting paid not $1 or $2. People are getting paid, $50. We paid somebody $1,100. You know what I mean? So people are making significant amount of money just by monetizing their data in our ecosystem. So that's the first thing. And the people who end up buying data from us on the other end, they're all different types of companies. So they're, on the marketing side, consumer packaged good companies, they're media companies, they are, banking companies who want to train their algorithms that make loan decisions, more efficiently. And so they can come to a company like Streamlytics and say, hey, in the United States, 30% of the population is African-American. Our credit decision algorithm, we would like to have 30% of the training data to be made up of African-American data. Do you have these types of data points? So that's a real reality with, what we're doing with Streamlytics.
Got it. Okay. Now backing up to the macro a little bit, thinking about everything that we just discussed for the last 35, 40 minutes, when you think about the future, Angela, 10 years down the road, let's say 10 years, dystopia or utopia? Which one are we moving towards?
Well, first of all, I'm an entrepreneur, so I feel like I'm wired glass half full.
Love it.
So, utopia, but it is kind of scary because it can get very dystopian if, you don't have people that are trying to make real solutions that impact everyone, not just themselves.
Right. Okay. Look, I feel like I could keep talking to you for another 2 hours. This is fascinating. So I'd love to have you back on, actually. But I want to thank you for your time.
We didn't even get to the investment part of it. So yeah, definitely have me back on.
Okay, we got to do that then. I love that. Thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for your time. It's been great to get you in front of my audience and pick your brain a little bit on a subject that I know I need to be more curious about. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
As always, if you enjoy this content, please hit subscribe. I'd love to have you on the team. And if you want to take the next step and go a bit deeper with my content, I publish a free weekly newsletter every Friday where I debrief my portfolio. I distill the top lessons I've uncovered from the guests I've had on this show every week. And I talk about sectors and industries that I think are poised to move, areas that I'm looking for opportunity, and places that I'm allocating capital. I love writing it. We publish every Friday. The link is right beneath this video. Love to have you join the tribe.